Welcome everyone. This is our last Cape Town Machine Learning Meetup group of the year. And this one's going to be a bit of an unusual one because instead of just having a talk, which we often have, we're going to have a panel discussion from a few people who have kindly agreed to speak to us about this area of expertise of theirs. So sort of the idea for this came out of some conversations we were having as a team where quite a few of us are either in really small teams or in startup teams or in organizations where the data functionality is quite new still. So we were asking these questions of each other, and then we thought, well, what about getting in some people who actually really know what they're talking about to come and share with us on these topics? So we reached out to a few people, and some great people bubbled up and offered to come and speak to us today. So we have Lisa Cohen, Leon van Beek, John Thompson, and Michelle McDevitt. Yeah, there they all are. In a moment, I'll ask them all to introduce themselves. Just some admin for today. If people would be willing, would you like to keep your videos on? Just because it's a bit dire speaking to a sea of just black faces, just everyone's like it's a bit impersonal. So if people are willing to put their videos on and smile and look happy and interested, that would be awesome. And give some reactions if you want.
Hey Laura,
yes.
I can't start my video because you've stopped it.
What? I'm sorry. I apologize. What have I even done? Okay, I've asked you to start your video. I hope that works.
There we go.
Yes. Okay, good. If anyone else is in that same problem, please wave your hand around or speak up. And which takes us to the next bit of admin, which is that our two people who are going to help coordinate today are Tembani, who's the guy with the moon behind him, or the earth, I don't know, that's Tembani. And he's going to be fielding questions. So if you have questions while the speakers are speaking, just put them up in the chat, and Tembani will kind of keep an eye on them and collate them, and then we'll have some sessions of asking those questions in between and see how that goes. And Tuso, who I can't actually see right now, where are you, Tuso? That's Tuso waving his hand in front of his curtain, and Tuso is going to be organizing mute, and if people have any problems, or if you can't get your video on, send Tuso a message or whatever. Yeah. Cool. Okay, in that case, we are good to go. So I'm not going to attempt to introduce the panelists beyond their names because they have such varied backgrounds and even where they're from. I'm rather going to let them introduce themselves. So maybe let's start, maybe we can do this alphabetically and start with Leon.
Hi.
And yeah, hey Leon. And for each of you, can we ask you just to tell us maybe what you're doing now, like what your role is in data now, and maybe just because so many of us are relatively new, how you started out in the data world.
Cool. Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Leon. Currently, I'm at Kuda Bank. They are a Nigerian digital bank. Before that, I'm currently head of data and decisioning systems. Before that, I was at Capitec Bank, leading the AI platform team. The AI platform team is currently busy developing the next generation AI platform for Capitec. And before that, I was head of data systems at Jumo. So my journey into the world of data really, so I'm an electronic engineer by training, but I went into software development. So I did a lot of software development. And then about 10 years ago, it was just with the start of data becoming mainstream, data and AI ML. I took the first course, that introduction to machine learning from Andrew Ng, when it was still ran out of Stanford, and also introduction to AI from Peter Norwick and Sebastian Thrun. So there I actually discovered, or actually for me it was great because it actually brought software engineering into the more mathematical and stats type of environment. And also one of my other passions is IoT, Internet of Things. So I joined a company called CT Lab in Stellenbosch, and they developed a power quality meter that monitors the quality of power. So it falls into the category of IoT, and they collected a lot of data. For example, over voltage, when frequency of the power dips, and it was great timing because it was at that stage basically that Eskom started to show some weaknesses in the grid. But they we basically, that just fueled the whole idea of data and the use of data. After that, I went to work for General Electric, intelligent platforms, and they also was in the industrial IoT environment. So again, just the enhancement of data, etc. And after that, I went to Jumo, and at Jumo, it was really that I started to work with data in a financial environment, in fintech, because Jumo is fintech. So at Jumo, it was a great experience to work in a startup environment, fintech. And then also, I would say my time at Capitec was again another experience in working in a more corporate environment to actually contrast the two environments, startup versus more corporate environment. And now I'm back again in a more startup environment. So that's my journey.
Yeah, that must have been super interesting. To have both and gone back from one to the other. Yeah, thank you, Leon. I realized that I accidentally did reverse alphabetical order. Sorry. So John, that means you're next. John, can you introduce yourself for us?
I was wondering. I thought, well, maybe the alphabet's different in South Africa. I
Sorry.
really know.
Sorry.
That's all right. Hi, everybody. John Thompson. I've been in the advanced analytics field for 37 years now. Like Leon, I've moved back and forth. I've either been on the end user side of it, implementing applications, or I've been on the vendor side, building technology to build those applications. So my wife asked me a couple months ago, she said, well, how many industries have you worked in? And I thought, okay, well, that's a challenge. So I'll sit down and figure that out. So I went through it, and I've worked in 20 different industries. And I've been part of teams that have implemented 60 different advanced analytics applications in those different industries for different companies. So I've been doing this for a long time, either building technology or implementing technology. In 2017, I wrote a book called Analytics, How to Win with Intelligence, which was a primer for executives to figure out how to invest in advanced analytics, who to hire, what teams to hire, how much to spend, what you should expect, what you shouldn't expect. This year, I wrote my second book called Building Analytics Teams. That book, I started writing it on January 1st and finished on April 13th. And it's 400 pages, 100,000 words, and it was published on June 30th. And since the second week in July, it's been in the top 1% of all book sales on Amazon. So I spend my time now talking to people about the effectiveness of analytics teams, how to hire them, how to structure them, how to manage them, how to get models into production. So I'm a lapsed programmer. I used to be an assembler programmer way back when. So yeah, it was fun. I can get down to a certain level of technicality, and then after that, I falter because I'm just so old, I guess it is. But that's me.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really, really cool. We invited John because I saw John's book advertised on LinkedIn, and I got it and started reading it, and it's amazing. I'll put up a link after this, but I've enjoyed it so much. I've been writing down little snippets. My favorite thing recently was when you wrote that people, our kind of people, generally don't like to only work on one thing. They like to work on a few things at once. Otherwise, we get bored. And I just saw myself in that so much. I wish my bosses knew that. Okay, great. Thank you, John. So next we have Michelle McDevitt. Michelle, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, I am the head of data science at Lululand. I actually just recently taken up that position a month ago. Before that, I was working at a consultancy in the Deep South called OLSPS. The acronym is a little bit odd, so I won't even try it. but just remember the letters. And basically, it was a consultancy, or it is a consultancy. And through that, I got a lot of experience because I worked in a number of different industries, not quite as many as John and Leon, but most of, yeah, I got a few under the belt so far. And then you also asked how we got into data science. And that's actually quite an interesting question for me, because I didn't have a very thorough thought process there. I was accused of being a hedonist at the time, because I just read an article about how data science is like the coolest career yet. So I thought, okay, well, let me do that then. I came from an academic background, and I was doing applied mathematics abroad, and I came back to do my postdoctoral position here in Cape Town. And then I decided to take the leap into industry. And at the time, data science was like the cool thing to do, and it still is. So I'm glad I made the right decision, basically.
Yeah, great. Yay for another Cape Townian. Yay. Yeah, thank you for joining us. And Lisa also we found via the internet for writing amazing Medium articles.
Wonderful. I'm Lisa Cohen. Nice to meet you all. I lead a data science team at Microsoft in an organization called Customer Growth Analytics. So we do a number of data science functions, from machine learning, analytics, experimentation, data visualization. And our charter is really around helping customers be successful in the cloud. And so we do that through a variety of predictions, recommendations, AI services. So it continues to be an exciting space. As far as my path, it's kind of interesting because I usually say that data science is a very diverse discipline in terms of the paths, but I actually do have parallels with a number of the panelists here, so that was kind of interesting to see. I've always been had math and science oriented, kind of enjoyed those analytical fields. So I started in applied math, like Michelle. I have my bachelor and master in Harvard in that space, and then went into development like Leon and John in one of his experiences as well. So I started at Microsoft 16 years ago working on Visual Studio. There were some data aspects because we were actually making data access easier from .NET and the C# and Visual Basic languages. As part of that role, I used to speak a lot, and I actually several times spoke at an event called Tech Ed in Durban. So I did get to go to Cape Town one of those years. So while it's lovely to be able to just hop on a Zoom call and meet you all, it would be really nice to also be there today. It was a great place. And yeah, as I've continued my career there, kind of like Leon, as data was growing and the feedback that we were looking for from our customers, increasingly we were growing our telemetry pipelines and doing product analytics and then business analytics and then machine learning models to better understand our customers and the usage patterns and how we could better serve them. That was how I eventually came into this space, first doing it for the Visual Studio product and then for Azure in my current role today. And like Laura mentioned, I love to blog and speak on these topics, so I've really enjoyed getting to meet others in the industry and other data science leaders. And so those are the experiences I'll be drawing on from today.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, great. Oh, there's a bit of feedback. If someone has someone meeting, great. Great, okay, thank you so much, everyone. So one of the first questions that prompted all of this, and which came up first when we were talking about it, is how do you structure the teams you're in? Maybe, or maybe how you structure now, how you've seen them being structured in the past, and maybe how would you recommend things change structure over time? Like, how do you start off structuring your data team, and what are people's experiences about that? You're welcome to put your hands up if any of you have particular answers. Yeah, go for it. That's perfect. Otherwise, shall we start? John, shall we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. Having written the book on this, I feel compelled to go first, but I'll go quickly. I've always seen it as you have an artisan-based team or you have a modular-based team. I personally like to start out with an artisan-based team, and an artisan-based team does everything, all the way from data acquisition, integration, feature engineering, modeling, stakeholder management, and then working with subject matter experts in IT to get the models into production. You can have a modular team where you have, in an artisanal team or artisan team, you may have 5, 6, 10 people. In a modular team, you may have 15 or 25 people doing the same amount of work. In a modular team, you'll have a couple people doing data acquisition, feature engineering, modeling, and the work runs through those different stations as it goes. Now, people say, okay, what's more expensive? Well, they're generally cost basically the same, because you need a certain unit of work or measurement of work going through it. And at this point, 3 years ago, I started out with an artisan team. Now I'm moving to a hybrid structure. I have a modular team that's doing all the data acquisition and integration and that kind of work. And that's feeding up to an artisanal team that's doing the feature engineering and the modeling and the other kind of stakeholder management. So I'll stop there.
Okay, that sparks lots more questions, but we'll come back to the questions after. Leon, you put your hand up. What were your thoughts?
So maybe what I'm going to say is very similar. What I've found is, so what I've seen so far in industry is that either a modular team, or as I like to call it, isolation, where you've got isolated teams. But what I've found is, and especially in practice, is that where you've got cross-functional, actually putting cross-functional teams together works much better. Where you've got exactly, to John's point, is where you've got basically a subject matter expert in each one of the end-to-end pipeline, and you actually bring them together as a project team where they can, as a team, complete the project. Whereas if it's siloed, it's always a handoff from one team to another, and that doesn't work out quite well. And I would even say is that the problem is exasperated in bigger companies, in corporate companies, so this cross-functional teams is much easier to actually do in startups, etc., but it becomes more difficult in a corporate environment.
Go for it, Lisa.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in as well. It's interesting. I think we're all experiencing a number of similar aspects, have some different terminology for them. But yeah, I often talk about centralized or distributed and embedded structures. So the centralization allows for specialization, center of excellence, career paths, mentoring, a lot of sharing of best practices and ideas. And so that's more or less what we've arrived at Microsoft, although it is a bit of a hybrid, because we have kind of these central organizations for each product area. So for Azure, for Office, for Windows, and then we kind of network across these larger groups. But there is also this kind of distributed model, whether that's embedding in one of the business groups, or even a smaller company or startup where you're the first data scientist, where you have to kind of wear multiple hats. And so, Leon touched on just some of the pros and cons and trade-offs in these scenarios. For example, I mentioned the benefit of the centralization, but then there's that challenge of the distance to the stakeholders. So when you're embedded, then there's no distance. You're just sitting right there, and you have the context, and they can immediately take the results of your work. So yeah, I think that was the article actually that I wrote that Laura had noticed about this topic. So I think we all have specific experience and passion about this. And then finally, when you come to the central, that group that you've assembled together, how do you decide on the different roles and the specializations within them? So there, what we've arrived at is a data platform group, basically the data engineering that's bringing together these vast data sets that help you have that end-to-end perspective on the user experience. So they're building the pipelines, helping run our models in production. And then on top of that would sit the analytics, experimentation, machine learning functions. And again, depending on the size of the organization, you might determine the amount of specialization that you have between each of those areas versus having individuals that are doing all three. And then one thing that we actually added more recently over the years was a program management and product management role. And that was to be able to help us plan and prioritize the projects. There's just, you know, an endless number of questions that come in this space. And then product management, as we start getting more into the AI services space. And so I think particularly for like machine learning engineers and scientists who are developing AI models that are running in kind of a customer facing production environment, it is important to have that product manager that's designing that user experience so that you can ensure that power those models, you're fully getting the full benefit of those in terms of how they're displayed.
Yeah. Yeah, that does sound like a lot of parallels. Michelle, your hand.
Cool, thank you so much. I very much agree with what Lisa has just mentioned as well. One of the challenges of having a centralized team that I very much feel the pressure of is the guys on my team very much lack the context in which their work sits. So they'll get handed a ticket from the product team and that context is very much lost. So we actually have to spend a lot of time explaining where and why this item needs to be done. So that's, yeah, I think that's like one of the main drawbacks of the centralized structure. But in your original question, Laura, you also asked, how would you go about starting a data science team? And I think that's actually quite an important aspect of it as well, because you don't necessarily want to hire someone that's very specialized to start off your team. Like there's obviously a huge requirement for someone who's very technical and has a huge knowledge base and knows how to, you know, put together a decent MVP or bash out a couple of models to get things off the ground and get the infrastructure in place. But moreover, you also need to consider, is that person really strong with their soft skills as well? I don't think that's something that's well considered in the data science community. You need someone who can explain very complex tasks in very simple terms and make sure that you can carry what you've just modeled. Can you explain that to the end user or to a business user? And those skills obviously extend into whether you can successfully hire people, recruit people, and manage a team as well. So I think that's also something to consider when you're starting out a data science team.
Yeah, we often, I think everybody wants to jump on that one.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right, Michelle. You know, we've seen it over and over again in the United States, and I speak at a lot of events, and I hear people coming up to me and going, oh, you know, we hired a data scientist and we expected he or she to do everything, and 6 months later they left and it was terrible, and we're 18 months back in a hole again. And, you know, and I always say, look, you know, if you're going to start a data science function, don't just hire a data scientist and put it all on their shoulders. That's a recipe for failure. You know, hire someone who's a leader who can build a corporate function. Because most of my job right now, a lot of my job right now is going and talking to C-level executives, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents, and getting them to understand that their subject matter experts need to be dedicated to the project. When we're done with modeling, then we're going to move into process reengineering, and they need to support all of it, and they need to put budget behind it. So, you know, it takes a team, and you know, just hiring one person and saying, make it happen, that's tough. That's hard on everybody.
Yeah, maybe just from my side, and yeah, Michelle, I think you're spot on. So what I have noticed is that with the buzz, and sorry for that, but with the buzz of data science, a lot of C-suite guys now, they've decided, right, we need data scientists, but they don't necessarily know how to apply data science correctly, data scientists. And most of the times, the data infrastructure is not ready yet to actually support data scientists. And I think also another thing that I saw is that they actually hire the wrong kind of people. They hire, and again, this is nothing against PhDs or anything, but they hire PhD guys, and PhD guys are normally, they want to go into research or do deep modeling, etc., and that's not necessarily what the business need at that stage. Sometimes you can get away with an analyst, or some of the questions that needs to be answered is analysts. So very often, and especially in South Africa, what you'll see is that data scientists are applied wrongly. They basically do analysis work most of the times instead of answering, or instead of asking the right questions, number one, and then also answering the right questions. Because one other thing is just for me is when people ask me, so I'm not a data scientist, but from all my observations is that what quality do I actually look for in a data science the most? So I always, my first thing is actually communication and domain expertise, and then the technical aspect to it. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how you solve it, it's what you solve. It's a question. And those questions, you need deep embedding into understanding how the business work to first of all know what those questions are. And then secondly, you need like an intuition, or you need some experience to say, right, is it possible to answer that question with the data that we have? Where is a lot of, and especially more junior guys, they just jump in and they want to build models, etc., etc. But the models, again, in itself is biased or isn't really answering the questions.
Yeah, great points here. I love the way John pointed out, that initial hire should be a strong leader. They're setting the culture of the organization. And then Michelle also on the communication points. I remember a course, and there's a book on this called Scientists Must Speak. I remember thinking, well, it's about like designing this algorithm and this scientific solution, and what is the speaking part about? But if you develop the most amazing thing and nobody knows about it, how much impact can it really have? So I do think in terms of the maturity of a data science organization, I see a lot of teams at different companies struggling with this, where it's just so easy for the data science team to fall into a service or ticket type of function, and that's really what nobody really wants. But the business doesn't always have the context of data science to know the full power of it and what to really ask for. So they'll ask for data points, or they'll ask for these analytics perspectives. And really, I think it's a successful org when you're a strategic partner with those business owners, and you're finding new insights in the data and recommending what they should be doing next. And when they ask for a data point, you're coming back with a new kind of recommendation model approach, or just helping them see not what they ask for, what they actually really want. And you're on that journey together. And so, yeah, I think there's obviously, other aspects of maturity around, reliability and uptime for models and production and engineering best practices. But yeah, that strategic business partner, I think, is a really key element for the future direction and impact of the organization.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I wrote it down, strategic business partner. This is a sidebar question from me that you guys just sparked. So I think actually a few of us who are listening here are the sort of PhDs who were the first hires, who are now have overly much expected of them and are trying to figure out how to navigate that. What would your advice be to people like us who are possibly the first data scientists, or one of the first few data scientists who now kind of have quite a high expectations of them?
Yeah, I can start. I like to talk about the 3 different skill areas for a data scientist. 1, the technical skills, 2, the domain context, and then 3, the soft skills. And so I think one thing you're pointing out is that, starting off, you might be stronger in one area than another. And there's actually a ton of these Venn diagrams in data science. Conway started one of the first ones, and you can find a number of variations online. It's quite entertaining and interesting. But anyway, I think sometimes people also apply that model to a data science team. And so I think that can be a healthy perspective. So when you're starting off, if you're not checking all the boxes in every area, I think a great approach, you can create a plan to learn and grow those areas, but develop that team around it. I think John pointed this out as well, that have a close partner, create a network so that you can check all those boxes together. And so I think that's sometimes a comforting approach to know that you can start and leverage your strengths and then still grow and partner with others to achieve the rest together.
Yeah. Can I jump in there? So my advice would be if you are in the position where you're the first or one of the first people in the data science team, I would almost look at it as it's a business plan you need to put together. You need to make sure you get organizational buy-in. You need to make sure there's a good vision and roadmap going forward. Don't like jump into boarding the first like random forest to like wow someone with your metrics. That's not the goal. Most certainly not. You want to map out what is like the 6-month goal, what's the 1-year goal, and then get buy-in from the organization such that you can get budgets and then expand on that. So yeah, my one-liners: don't get siloed.
So I agree with Michelle. I would say the first thing is to basically understand the business inside, or try to understand the business as best as you can, because that will immediately that will point out to you where there is. So I mean, there is different focus areas for data scientists, but data science is there, like any analytical, all the other analytical skills is to optimize the business, optimize what the business should do. So my advice will be, understand the business as best as you can, understand the way that information flows in the business, and see all these points, all these decisioning points where decisions could be made or where optimizations can be made. And then, as Michelle say, basically put together some sort of roadmap. And maybe as part of that, because I mean, like anything else in life, is that if you can show success or success, even if it's small wins, start out by the small wins. So ramp it up as a maturity curve. Don't go too big immediately, but in most organizations, there should be small wins. Yeah, low hanging fruit.
So I agree. This will be the last time I say it, because I agree with everything Lisa, Michelle, and Leon have said. So if I disagree, I'll say I disagree, but I agree with everything that's been said so far. The one thing that people ask me continually is how do I create a problem, or what do I focus on? And I say, well, businesses have challenges every day. Now, it could be, understanding the customers. It could be having a more efficient supply chain. It could be having a better pricing model. As a data scientist, you shouldn't have to create a problem. Really what Leon said is absolutely true. Understand what the most pressing strategic problem is for the business. Try to understand it, even starting out with exploratory data analysis. Just showing people that you understand the data set. Most of the time, they won't even understand the business from a data-driven perspective. You don't have to show up with a neural net or a decision tree or a boosted tree or, anything like that. Just show up with an EDA, and that'll be the first thing that'll open their eyes to what the business really is being driven by. So, number one, you don't have to create problems. They're there. Just go fix them. And number two, like Leon said, start out small. You don't have to prove that you're smart. They hired you because you're smart. You just have to prove that you can work with people.
Sure.
Just jump on the starting with the EDA. I think that's so critical. Even if you do ultimately end up building that model, having that foundation on the data set, and of course, for data quality reasons, checking those bounds and making sure that they're within reason for the business, and then just understanding the distribution is going to impact the statistical tests that you're running on top of it. So that's just such a critical step that at times gets glossed over if you're just kind of running into the solution. So I think that's so important, both for kind of the initial impact and quick win you can have, as Leon and John both pointed out, as well as if you end up advancing beyond that, it's a great foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Carrying on from that, what the sort of next question we had, and it is a carry on from the same thing, was what would you define as success? Maybe you've actually each all answered that to some degree in these previous questions. So maybe we don't even need to ask that question. I think you actually have, unless anyone else has something in their mind that they'd like to add to that. Like, what would be a successful data team or data project? Sorry.
I'll just say something really quick. Everything that we do at CSL, my data science team, we denominate in monetary value. So we talk about how many donors did we bring in? How many donors did we retain? You know, how fast did we get things through the pipeline? How many more batches did we run through manufacturing? And those all can be denominated in euros and dollars and renminbi and yen and things like that. So we never really we don't leave it to chance on the value that we're driving to the business. We make it clear, this is what we're doing.
That is so interesting. So do you mean in a project, you would actually say, okay, we're building a model to do X and it's going to be able to somehow from the business side of things, you'll figure out how to say, this is going to save us X man hours and man hours cost us much or something like that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
I just want to add to that. So I think, so it's not always that easy, but ultimately, if you can't show business value, if you can't show how you optimize something, if you can't take it back to a monetary value that the business scored or win, then I think it's not necessarily successful. Because at the end of the day, it's a business. You are optimizing certain functions, and by being able to show the monetary saving or the value that you bring, that's for me real success. Otherwise, it's just a project that you did. So for example, the classic trap that a lot of more junior guys is doing is when they build models, they'll look at accuracy or whatever, but they won't necessarily consider the business impact, because it's not necessarily always the most accurate thing that adds the most business value, for example. So for me, it's like business value. And that is something as a technical person that I also had to learn, because I was also just from the point of view, this is nice techniques, etc. But sometimes it's the most simplest things that actually brings about the most business value.
Yeah, I'll add on that because I think it is an important topic and comes up in a number of forums. Similarly, we also, for each project, work to quantify the impact. And it's, sometimes a challenging exercise at first, but I think helps the organization develop some frameworks and approaches for how to quantify the impact. There's the revenue aspect. We also have some that, will speak to impact on customer satisfaction or retention. And I think maybe where you're going, John, is that, those you could map to revenue in various contexts as well. But that key in terms of being able to measure and push yourself to think about how could I measure the impact of this comes up in so many forums. I mean, when you're looking back at the success of your organization over the past period, you want to be able to have those impact statements to articulate, what was the end result of what we delivered. And I find it's also useful on the flip side, on the project intake. So I mentioned that just in this discipline, I find prioritization is so critical because there's so many requests, and every answer that you deliver, brings tons more questions. So in terms of how we prioritize the projects and the opportunities, we do look at each project proposal and we ask ourselves, what is the impact, the business opportunity of each of these? And it really helps sift through that large list. And even working with the stakeholders, we all come to really common alignment in terms of the order we should approach. And so they can then see why, number 40 is where it is, or why one just shouldn't even be done, because it actually is more of a curiosity that, we feel like we should know that, but there's not really a business opportunity or a different decision or action that would come as a result. So I think it's an important perspective.
Yeah, that's really, I'm going to remember that, putting monetary values on my things to my boss. That's great. Timbani, I think you have a question. Except you're on mute.
Sorry. It's just a habit from Teams, always speaking on mute. Sorry, yeah, there is one question from Ibalo in the chat, and he was just asking, sort of relating to our previous discussion about communication being so vital. He was really asking, if you're one of those data scientists that maybe doesn't have great communication skills, how can you develop them And I guess a follow-up to that was sort of maybe in your experience, what kind of impact has developing your communication skills had on your career?
It's enormous. I mean, communication skills cannot be underestimated. We just ran our team through 2 different series of trainings. One was on public speaking, presentation, verbal. The next one that we will do is written communication. And then we just did a training on data visualization, which is another form of communication. So believe it or not, when I was in high school, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, I was so shy, I wouldn't talk to anybody. And at one point I just decided this is not the way I want to live my life. And I just changed it. So, my communication skills are probably one of the top reasons why I've gotten to where I am at.
So maybe from my side, and yeah, John, I can relate. I mean, I think most technical people are more introverted naturally. So I mean, the only way really to improve your communication skill is by just forcing yourself to actually doing it. And what you'll find is that initially it will be a little bit scary. And especially public speaking. I mean, I'm still not a public speaker. The fact that I'm here tonight is already for me like a big thing. But it's actually just telling yourself that this is part of what you need to develop to be successful in as a data scientist. And then also, I think one thing that you should also practice is the fact to that way of simplifying things or being able to explain it in non-technical terms, because that is a big put off, and especially so it's actually a put off not necessarily for the technicality of it, that too, but if you think about the people that you are presenting to your findings, they are normally very busy people, so they want really the crux of the matter. They want it summarized. They don't want to hear long technical discussions of the model, etc., what you build. They want it short and sweet and summarized and also logically laid out. That's the other thing that I found. And it is quite interesting that I would have thought that most technical people will follow a logical line of explaining things, but it's not always the case. Some people is jumping all around the place without following that just logical reasoning line of thought, and clearly and in a concise, simple way convey the information that they need to convey.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, I would just point out for the question asker, it's a very common topic. Looking at the learning plans across my teams over the years, you think there's going to be the technical aspects, which there definitely are as well, kind of learning the next technology, but communication is just such a common topic on there. So you're not alone. And then just agree with others around the impact that it has. It really is a distinguishing factor from taking your organization from being this more academic research kind of separated group to being that business partner, if you can articulate the impact and the takeaways, as Leon was raising as well. So yeah, I often talk about how there are 2 types of presentations we do about our work. One is the technical presentation, which we share within our group and with the machine learning community at Microsoft and outside. And then there's the business stakeholder view. And as Leon mentioned, it's being concise and getting to the takeaways and using the business language. We don't use any machine learning terms in that case. We use data visualization and things like color to help the main point stand out, single axes. It's, just think about the time to understanding. And I also use the term of like thinking of a busy stakeholder, and then that ends up benefiting everybody. What's the fastest way that you can communicate the results? And then as they immediately get it, that's where the most impact of your work will be able to be translated through to the business. So in terms of how to get there, I would agree with the doing it part. I find that practice, you'll immediately smooth out your storyline, your your talk track, you can video yourself, and you'll be able to notice things, because there are coaching and trainings that you can do, but I do find that's a quick thing that you can do yourself. And then, yeah, you'll find there's a number of different trainings online or things of that nature that you can go through that will talk about how to break down your storyline, things like breaking into different phrases, eye contact, gestures, etc., common practices. There are some coaches dedicated to this. I got to work with some when I was doing a lot of conferences. Richard Cleese is an example I point out who will give you some very direct and straight feedback. So Toastmasters is another group that people will join to get more practice. And then feedback. So I know a number of folks from my group, when they're working on this, they'll ask me, right after the presentation, how did that one go? And just getting that quick feedback, having that growth mindset and being ready to iterate will help you really quickly progress here.
Yeah, I can just add to that. My advice here is not to feel overwhelmed. And if you're not a good presenter, that doesn't mean you're not going to be a good data scientist. Because it also extends to just written communication. So often I would explain things to other stakeholders just in a quick email. But when you write that email, you need to think about the structure and how concise can you be. And one piece of advice I've given to my team just this last week is, when you ask a question, make sure that there is only one outcome to that question. It has to be so unambiguous that it's easy to answer as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in. One last thing, a very practical thing. First and foremost, remember, when you're presenting to groups, most of the people are rooting for you to succeed. There's very few people in the audience that want you to fall down on your face and look bad. That's generally not the way people think. Secondly, in our group, what we've done is that we always have the teams, the data scientists, present their presentations to us first. And when we first did it, one of the team members was going to present to a senior vice president, another was going to present to an executive vice president. And they did their presentations, and at the end of it, I said, those are very interesting presentations. Who were they for? And the both data scientists said that was for me and to prove how smart I am. And I said, yes, that's exactly what you did. Now go back and write a presentation that an executive is going to be interested in hearing. And they did. And they were great presentations. And both of them got just amazing feedback from the executives. They were focused on their language of the executive, supply chain and finance. They were focused on business results. They were focused on, impact to the business. They came back and they were so happy. They're like, oh, it's just like you said it would go. And I'm like, that's right. So we as leaders, we work diligently to set our teams up for success. And that's just one way I've done it in the past, and it seems to work every time.
Yeah, that is awesome. I'm actually sorry, I'm interrupting someone. I was going to hand back to Timbani. Apparently, a bunch of new questions have come in. Timbani, go for it.
Thank you. This time it gave me the unmute yourself option. Yeah, so we got a good question from Jess that's also part of this thread, where she was just asking around how do you actually keep your team, or how do you get your team motivated, or how do you encourage them to develop those kind of skills? And I think some people have already touched on this, but I think what she's trying to say is that a lot of teams, technical teams, people like to develop and build technical skills. And I guess with everyone, you like to sort of work on the things that you are already quite good at. So how do you get people to sort of step out of that a little bit and develop some of these other areas, specifically communication?
Leon, go for it.
You basically make it part of their career progression as part of how you evaluate it as a data scientist, because it's such a crucial skill. You have, and I mean, I don't want to use the word, but sometimes one needs a little push. And if you actually make it part of the way that you are evaluated yearly and so forth, that encourages people to actually get out of their comfort zones and actually start to do that. So for example, one recent place that I used to work, I know the data scientists on the JD and also the yearly performance reviews, one of the things was to actually how many times did they present to the executive team. And that is, and it was also seen that the more comfortable you get with that, it's an indication of how your seniority as a data scientist also grows. So you could actually build it into the career progression as part of developing the team.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Actually, oh, Lisa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and it looks like the question is around also like the critical thinking and the data insights and connecting that to business value and how to specifically grow those areas. Yeah, for full disclosure, I'll just say those are some of the areas I try to focus on actually in the interview, because I find that some of them are pretty just part of the instinctive or way that people think, but I don't know if that's immediately helpful for the question. So just for the question, obviously, if you want to grow this in a team, yeah, as Leanna was mentioning, kind of that repetition, I think about it as a cultural aspect. So in terms of culture, in order to really make culture real, it's about, not just speaking to something, but really acting it and living it. And so if you ingrain it into that career development, into the goals of the team, I think just like John was asking and coaching the team members on what is the result of this, what are we trying to accomplish, just that repetition of, every time we're going to approach asking and framing the projects in that way, I think that helps shift the culture of the team and helps people think more along those lines.
Yeah, awesome. Actually, Michelle, you said at the beginning that you worked in consulting for a while before. What were the kind of things that you learned from that? Because that must have been a big aspect of communication. And is that any different from your current role of being more embedded in an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the one thing that really got me there was the timekeeping. You always have to log your time. But yeah, absolutely. Like there was a lot more, not onboarding, but like upskilling. Like as soon as you got into a new project, every project was obviously different. You didn't only have to understand how to solve this problem, but you had to like engulf that and all that context from that company into your own knowledge base, which was quite challenging at times, as you can imagine. Obviously now where I am, there's one single focus, and I've spent the last month upskilling in that and understanding the context and in the industry that I'm in. But yeah, obviously with consulting, you had to understand that industry every time, and obviously there wasn't 27 industries, but of the 4 or 5, there was a lot of upskilling each time at the start of every project. And of course, yeah, so like just to tie it back to our previous conversation, the communication was absolutely key in those situations, obviously, because you had to communicate, or at least I had to communicate with the project manager on their side. And invariably, it wouldn't just be the project manager. There will be some business analyst or some other key stakeholders. So you wouldn't just be talking to people on your level. You'll be talking to people, up the chain and the guys on the ground. Like you do need to know how to talk to different levels, basically, and you absolutely need to step out of your comfort zone regularly.
Yeah, I do find a number of parallels with this function and consulting, and I think in addition to the ones mentioned, I find both folks with a consulting background as well as an MBA background really excel in the taking an ambiguous problem and framing it and developing a go forward plan and kind of how to attack it with the data solution. So I think those are valuable skills from those fields.
Hey, Laura, I'm going to have to go at the top of the hour. It's been great, but and I will stay on for the next 3 minutes. Just want to let you know I'm going to have to drop off. I have another call I got to go to.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, John. It was an absolute pleasure to hear from you. And I'll post a link to your book everywhere so people can see. Come visit us in Cape Town after COVID.
Oh, I'd love to.
John.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Cool. Actually, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with us? Maybe just biggest challenges and how you would avoid them.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we're all facing right now, and I'd love to hear from Lisa, Michelle, and Leon, is it's not It's not the math, it's not the science, it's not the data, it's actually organizational change. It's navigating through the organization to be able to do process re-engineering, to get our models into production, and then get through the governance process so our refreshed models are in the systems at a time where they're the most impactful. That's really the challenge. And that's what I spend most of my time working on, really. I would prefer to be working on modeling and data and other things like that, but I spend most of my time with executives, getting them to understand that, hey, you know, we are going to have to change how we do business, and this is a better way to do it. So that's the biggest challenge we face right now.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was really, really great to be invited. Thank you very much.
Yeah, cool. I think Timbani actually has some other questions from the floor, so let's hand over to him and see.
Sorry, I just quickly want to say something.
Oh, go for it, Jan.
On what John said, and I totally agree with that, because a lot of so again, maybe it's my engineering background, but the thing is just what I've seen the most is there's a lot of awesome stuff being done by data scientists, but it's very difficult always to action it. So the system isn't designed from the start with decisioning in mind, so that you can actually feed back that great work that was done to actuate the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, Lisa, do you wanna carry on speaking to that, or Timbani, do you want to put up your hand and ask your question, and we'll circle back to that afterwards?
Yeah, I'm happy to add on. I think that yeah, as a data science org leader, focus is a key point, as John was raising. And so I think I also mentioned that in this field that prioritization is so key, and the cultural aspect. So, you know, keeping the team focused on really what matters and making sure that's clear for everybody is a big focus for me. And there are a number of ways that we've done that with our stakeholders as well, through more rigorous planning processes to help us all, you know, get very structured in our approach.
I'll quickly add to that then. You asked what are the bigger challenges? What's something that I find quite challenging is protecting the team from the heat from the stakeholders. Often a stakeholder will say, I want like 50% market share. And it's the data science team, it's their task to achieve this. And of course, sometimes such a question can't actually be answered by the data. So you'll spend 3 or 4 months slogging, and you'll come back and say, hey, we did all this work, but there's no results. And sometimes that's okay, but you don't want to hear that negative feedback from the stakeholder, sorry, let me put it this way. You don't want the negative feedback from the stakeholder affecting the morale of your team. So personally, I find that quite tricky to manage.
So how do you manage that? How have you been? Yeah.
I don't know if I'm doing it successfully or not, but we always just celebrate the small wins. So instead of just waiting to celebrate the end of the project, like, hey, this sprint we did X, Y, Z, let's celebrate that. We will have a little hi-fi board. So there's just like, there's like positive reinforcement throughout the whole project, so that at the end, if it's a big flop, it's not all lost.
Yeah, I can speak to that because I'm often in that situation as well. And I think maybe where you're going there is, you know, trying to lay out the big picture, because everything kind of in isolation looks important or whatnot. But I think, yeah, sharing the full backlog of what you're achieving, or if it's trying to convince a stakeholder for why we're taking one approach versus another, kind of objectively and simply laying out the approach, you know, sharing some of the pitfalls of the other one, why we wouldn't want to be presenting or misleading in that way. And so I think just really honing that storyline tends to be a pretty convincing approach as you're partnering with others.
Go for it, Timbani.
Cheers, thank you. So we have a bit of a two-part question, I guess, partially from JDK. which comes back to the question about value. So Lisa, you've mentioned this a couple of times. You like to use value to prioritize projects. But what happens when you have a relatively, let's say, a small project, maybe a small little POC, which has no direct impact on the business, but it actually enables potentially other very high impact projects? I think that's the one part of the question. And the other part is about sometimes estimating the value itself actually requires doing a bit of work or engaging stakeholders. And so you don't really know what the value is until you've actually done something, but then you use the value to prioritize what you should do. There's a bit of a chicken egg there. So I'm hoping someone can take that up.
So I'm going to take a stab at it. So, and that basically takes me back to the point that I made in this at the start of understanding the business, understanding where the decision points is understanding how you can optimize. So my first question would be the fact that you identified the POC would have already actually said that you anticipate there might be an optimization somewhere. So I'm not sure if anybody will just do a POC for the sake of POC without some sort of end goal in mind, some sort of value to add. So I think to a large extent, the fact that you've identified a POC is already indicative of some sort of business problem that you're trying to solve. So you can't necessarily immediately put actual monetary value to it, but the fact that you've identified the problem, and I'm sure people is not going to work necessarily on, or hopefully not on small problems that's not going to have some sort of impact. So I think actually what I'm trying to say is that the fact that it's a POC is already implied that there is some business value to actually to be gained from implementing it and proving it.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. I was also going to challenge the just the wording around having no direct business impact, and perhaps the direct word was the key one there. But I think it is really important to just speak to that POC in the language of the ultimate business impact that it has. And perhaps this is also from more of the development background, but there definitely are going to be times when you need to make core platform investments, architecture investments. And so I think that also runs into this challenge of like, well, it's not the shiny end product that you're going to be able to show. However, it's going to enable leaps and bounds in the future. And so a few scenarios where I've encountered this is, one, it's often when you notice a pattern. So you have a number of requests with the same types of asks, and you realize that, hey, if I invest in a foundation or a framework, I can answer those all much more efficiently in the future. So attribution is a very common question. Most program owners, feature owners want to know, what's the impact of X? We get that question all the time. And so we did develop a model for that. And so that involved kind of bringing the data sources together and building the infrastructure around that. Another scenario where this comes up is experimentation. If you want to be able to run experiments in a scalable way and have the quickest time to learning, then you need to put together experimentation platform and framework, both for the run and analyze the results of the experiment. And so I think it is good to break those up into small chunks and kind of do that agile planning, like I think the POC approach does here. So that gives you some real milestones along the way, especially when you're taking on a massive project like this. But I think when you speak to the impact of each of those individual milestones, maybe rather than trying to push so hard on like the direct impact of that milestone, speak to the longer term impact. And I found that to be really successful, when talking with the stakeholder who wanted to run all these experiments, for example, on our Azure trial and the different ways we could structure that, they were able to reason with, okay, well, we're going to invest in this infrastructure, and then that's going to allow us to test a number of these variables a lot more quickly in the future.
Maybe just to add to what Lisa said is that if you actually, so currently there's one of the buzzwords is ML engineers. So if you also the way that you organize your team, you could have a specific or you can actually divide your team into tool builders that actually facilitate or make it easier to do these other type of experiments or build models. And then you can have people who actually make use of the tools that builds the solutions. So I actually like to sometimes think about it that way too, is to say right there, but you need to do some infrastructure investment, and that you can't necessarily immediately quantify. But contextually, you can say right there, but this will make it easier or faster for us in the future to do the following. And also again, Lisa, what you also mentioned from a software development background, I mean, it's like any reusable type of component. You actually do a thing once or twice, but the third time you see if it's a pattern, you go and try to build something that will automate that pattern.
Yeah, I actually totally love that tip. I'm totally going to take that home because there's a number of things that I like that in my work. I'm very much going to remember that. Actually, that brings us right back to something we touched on at the beginning, but didn't go into much depth on, when John said that he sort of views it as, what did he call them? Artisanal teams and modular teams. So I suppose what you're speaking about now is more like Leon, is more like a modular team where some people have that particular role and other people have different roles. And that was actually a question we got at the beginning. So, you know, nowadays you can be a data scientist or a data analyst or an advanced data analyst or a data engineer or a ML engineer or and even others. There's even more. There seems to be all the time. You know, data guru. I heard and saw someone's Facebook thing the other day. So just, do you have any thoughts around those things? How have you, I know Lisa, you spoke to this a little bit earlier too, like how have you brought these on board? And maybe if people have stories in particular about things that maybe didn't work, it's sometimes easier to hear about what we shouldn't try. Yeah. Michelle, it looks like you're going to say something.
You just brought back memories from our past. What didn't work was having a front-end engineer within the data science team. That wasn't the best combination. But now we have a data engineer, which has actually been amazing. We have a separate engineering team that obviously sources all the data and does all the engineering components of it. But we have one engineer within our team, and that has been an absolute like breakthrough for us, because all of a sudden we don't have this dependency on a different team. If we want to deploy our model or build an API, we can just do that. We don't have to, log a ticket, prioritize it, get it spec'd and push into the next sprint. We can just do that, and that's that concept of just having everything in your team such that you don't have any blockers. I think that's very important. So obviously it's very dependent on the environment that you're in. So that's what works for us, and that's what didn't work for me in the past.
Yeah, that resonates as well, just in terms of thinking about how to structure that data engineering team. I think the trade-offs that you run into are you want it to be run by a strong engineering leader, have those sound engineering practices. We're going to be developing these models in production. They need to be performant, scalable, reliable. And so that's a very specific software development background. And you want to have good career paths within that as well. And so that lead to more of, really developing out a data engineering org. If you end up at that scale. But then the challenge that you run into, the other trade-off that Michelle was raising, is that like the larger that gets, and if the more distance that gets from the data science team and the machine learning team working on top of it, then you have that challenge of coordinating and planning together. And then I think Leon was even mentioning, the investments that they're making on the platform, they need to also be able to articulate the end impact that those are having in order to see that through. And so it requires just really strong collaboration together. And then, we end up kind of with a hybrid of it as well. We bring a few folks embedded kind of into the data science team so that we can have that quick turn, because, mid planning cycle, stakeholders are going to ask for things and we won't have always known that in advance. So the data engineering team won't have been able to plan for that. And so we'll start some pipeline development and we'll do POCs, and then we might productionalize it with the platform team in the future. So I think there's, it's kind of interesting, these trade-offs kind of pulling us both ways, but I've seen this pattern multiple times. So it just seems to be, you know, kind of a real phenomenon in terms of how the groups work together. And then, yeah, in terms of the roles, you know, sitting on top of that, you know, providing those end results to the stakeholders. I had mentioned, you know, between kind of machine learning, analysis, and kind of inference or experimentation. I think those are some of the key functions. And then, yeah, I've seen different models in terms of, you know, having folks wear more hats, which is kind of nice because then you have this broad tool set you can bring to the domain space, and then you can kind of align individuals with the domain area and periodically check back to see if you're resourcing each area as aligns with the strategic priorities and business priorities. On the other hand, you know, you can specialize within those. It can be really powerful if you get to that scale to have, you know, experimentation org, really thinking from that mindset and best practices. So I have seen both of those approaches, and sometimes, you know, it doesn't have to be all cut and dry one or the other and have these really hard lines between roles. I also encourage folks that if you're passionate about a space and you want to grow additional tool sets, it's just going to make you more impactful in your role. You'll be able to do more yourself without having to necessarily rely on others and coordinate schedules. So, you know, you want to have good practices for that, but it's not a bad skill to have back pocket. And I think ultimately the business recognizes that impact. So they don't kind of put you in a box and say, oh, because this is your title, you can only do this. If you do broader impact around that, that's appreciated as well. I think the last thing I'll just note on the titles is that in terms of maturity and where we are with data science in the industry, that the titles and what they mean still vary quite a bit. I think even across the panelists, if we would define each of them, it probably would vary a bit as well. And so I think if you are looking for a role in any of these spaces, I just really encourage to read the job description, look at the tools you're going to be using, look at what you're ultimately accountable for. That's a good final check, just to make sure you understand what this term means in that particular company.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think between us, even also just the guests here, we have different titles and working on the same thing, and same titles and working on totally different things. So it's quite a thing to navigate. Yeah, we only have 15 minutes left, so maybe we should actually take 2 seconds just to see if there's any more questions from the floor, if people have anything particular. Otherwise, we can just carry on with the few things we have. Anyone have any burning questions? If you do, just wave your hand around. We can just put you on. Or people being shy. People are being shy. Jonathan, who's being shy, put a question in that said, for budding data scientists, is it better to generalize early or dive straight in and study and become very specialized and then switch over? And as team leads, what do you look for? Do you look for people who've generalized or people who have become very excellent in a niche thing?
Can I maybe? So I think it all depends on the company. I think it all depends on the size and also what is required at that stage of the growth of the company. Because in the beginning it might make sense to have more generalists, and as the company gets bigger and as it matures, then it might make sense to actually have specialist areas. So I don't think there's a single simple answer that fits everything. It all depends.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for this. So maybe, you know, hopefully there's sometimes that can be helpful or not helpful. Sometimes people want a clear direction, but it means that, you know, I think either can work. And I look for both in terms of hiring, because I am hiring for more of that Venn diagram of the team. And so it's great to have some folks that have a variety of backgrounds. That means I can put them on a variety of different types of projects and roles, and they'll be able to be kind of successful. Of course, I also want to know kind of what they're passionate about and where they want to go in the future when I'm aligning. But then, yeah, also having a few deep specialists in a specific area are really powerful for providing leadership and mentorship for others in the team, and being able to have some great wins in those spaces too. So either path works. There's a book actually called Range that talks about, you know, the more generalist approach and the some of the benefits of that. So that can be a valuable perspective. And yeah, I mean, early on, I think a couple of things I would consider, you know, if you're really passionate in a specific area already and you know that, that can be a great way to have strong wins in that space and develop your credibility and reputation and just experience. But if you're still starting out and exploring, you know, maybe sampling a bit from the different types of responsibilities can be a good way to get started and see what you enjoy, what your strengths are and your talents, and can help you navigate the journey in that way too.
Maybe I could just quickly also add to that. I think a lot of people is looking. So a lot of people is looking for their career, or to actually do how can I put it? They try, or they're looking for opportunity in their day-to-day career to grow. And it's not necessarily the case that you'll find it there or that you should wait for it there. There's nothing stopping you to actually specialize in something that you're interested after hours, pet projects or things like that. And most probably, because the thing is, once you've got that specialized expertise, you can bring it back into your day-to-day career.
If I could add to that, when I recruit people, that is exactly what I look out for. What have they done outside of their job on their own terms? Those pet projects are so important. At least for me, it's been a really good indicator of a successful data scientist, because it obviously shows that you're motivated and you're keen and you're willing to work after hours. And also it highly demonstrates your curiosity. Your curiosity obviously extends past your job description, which is amazing, and I love that.
Yeah. The thing is, for me, is it actually shows your passion for your craft. That you're willing to do it even if you're not getting paid for it.
Yeah, and I often actually advise that too when people are looking to make a transition, whether they're maybe a PM getting into data science, or they're a data scientist interested in more of a people leader management role, is to find ways that you can start to get experience and in that space. And you can often do it by volunteering. People are often very welcome to have you take on more work that helps them, and that's a great way that you can get mentorship. And there even are ways you can do it in your current role, so that you don't need to work after hours, just to kind of give that option too. And your current management will recognize and appreciate, again, with the kind of not having to be in a box, you can have impact in broader ways. So I always recommend, exactly like Leon mentioned, like, don't ask for permission, just go ahead and do it. If you want to get more into speaking or one of those different roles, you know, try it out. You'll get to learn yourself how you react to it and how much you enjoy it. And then you'll start building this repertoire of things you've accomplished in the space. So that's going to be great on your resume, and as you interview for that next role, to share what you've already done. So yeah, I think great points that Michelle and Leon have raised here.
Yeah, and that's such a reminder to us as well to give people opportunities to try things outside of their normal, you know, if they have an interest, and people will surprise you by their abilities and what they can do. The converse of the question you just answered, which maybe is going to be sort of the same answer, but I'd like to hear it anyway from you, is just a couple of my friends, who are, some of them here, some of them not, are people who are in companies that want to start their first data teams, and they've thought about it and thought a little bit like what you guys were saying earlier. Okay, we don't want to hire a very specialized data scientist because we don't even know what we want to do yet. So then maybe we should hire a data engineer, or maybe we should hire an analyst. But we also don't know what we want to do yet, so we don't know what to ask a data engineer to do. and we don't know what to ask an analyst to do. And so how should we even start? So do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, so early on, I think it is going to be useful to wear multiple hats, have someone who has a little bit more varied skills so that you can leave your options open for the paths you're going to arrive. But I think that some data engineering skills and some analytics skills are going to be a really strong foundation. One, you need to instrument the telemetry and start building that data platform. But if you don't have anybody analyzing or looking at it, you might not know how good it is. So you kind of need both of those. And then on the analyst side, as we discussed, kind of the importance of EDA and just being able to set those baselines for the team. I think before you kind of do more sophisticated advances on top of that, you kind of need to know your baseline and just where things stand. So those are a couple things that I've seen in terms of just kind of the life cycle for these spaces.
Yeah, maybe from my point, again, I'm actually back to what are you trying to achieve? So that's the first question that you need to ask, because I mean, you're not going to hire people if you don't know what you want to achieve. So you need some sort of at least a problem statement of what you want to do before you even consider what kind of resources you need to actually solve that problem.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Leon. And then, of course, this needs to speak to the person's mindset as well. They need to be someone who's keen on building the strategy out around that business problem that you've given to them.
So maybe the question then is there sort of a personality or mentality trait that you think is valuable?
Yes.
Yeah, Lisa.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know, Michelle, you mentioned a couple of times the word curiosity. That is something that really rings strong for me as well when I think about data scientists. I think it comes through in a number of places. One, if you're, setting out on that problem, the curiosity of, how could this be used? What are the creativity around the different approaches that I could take? Because there's no one right answer, right? There are different modeling approaches that you could have for any given problem. I think it's good to be able to have multiple options in mind. And then as you go and you start working with the data, exploring the data quality or just the interesting insights and patterns, surprises, I think that curiosity also lends itself well there. So I see that, yeah, the curiosity, the creativity being a couple of strong traits.
So I agree with the curiosity, but I want a can-do attitude. The can-do attitude is for me the important thing, because if you've got a can-do attitude, you are basically prepared to actually go and learn what you don't know. So it actually goes hand in hand with curiosity, but it's not just sitting and sitting back and waiting for somebody else to actually help you out with something, because normally when you start out with all of those supporting structures aren't there. So you'll have to get your hands dirty in areas that you won't necessarily feel comfortable initially with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So also in terms of kind of that grit and determination, one specific example where I've seen that is kind of going from academia to kind of applied in an enterprise setting. Sometimes in a school project, we might get more of a test data set that's a cleaner set to work with. And then I have seen that be kind of an overwhelming step, working with just some of the big data sets that we have and just noisier data and finding approaches to work with those outliers. So I think, as Leon mentioned, it does require that drive to kind of find a solution and not be overwhelmed as you encounter different roadblocks along the way.
I have a question. So how do you, sorry for the background noise. So how do you generally handle management of expectations around data science teams? So let's say in the last 5 years, I've been working with data in different companies, and with there's always very high expectations from management and from executives around the data science teams. And like almost 100% of the times in the beginning, those expectations are not met. Like after some iterations and a lot of learnings, and sometimes years, like people start understanding the value, but it really takes time. How do you handle this mismatch that like it won't happen magically as the executives think in the beginning?
Now, can I take a stab at that? So this is exactly to the point of communication that we spoke initially, is that you as a data scientist or the leader of the data science team, or even the leader of the broader data and analytics team, it is your responsibility to communicate to your executive team what is realistically possible and what not. So they should never be under illusions that this is a silver bullet that just can solve everything. Because unfortunately, and again, this actually brings me back to that first point of hiring data scientists without knowing what you expect from them, or not understanding what is realistically possible. And even if you've got the data necessary to actually do or actually solve some problems that you have. So it's communication and also education of your executive team.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and definitely a challenge. So yeah, as Leon mentioned, however you can objectively share, here's what it will take for us to do X, Y, Z, and kind of a understandable way, probably easier said than done. But I also find that sometimes giving a soft landing can be an approach too. So if they're looking for an 100% solution, but you can say, hey, and that's going to take you months or some time that's too long for the business in terms of your kind of go-to-market time frame. Sometimes you can say like, well, but we can do an 80% approach here that's going to be done in a week. Sometimes that's sufficient for what the business needs. So I find sometimes kind of getting creative in terms of understanding what they're trying to accomplish, and alternatives can also be a way to navigate that discussion.
Awesome. I think Tembani has a final question actually. So then maybe let's hand over to Tembani and then do a final round of answers. Cool.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I just have one question for all the panelists, and it's yeah. I mean, it's just a question I like to ask just to get people's sense of where they're at and what they think and how they feel. But the question is, what are your aspirations for the data science machine learning industry in the next year or two? What are the things you hope will happen?
It's a big question. I know one put up their hands, yes.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all so passionate around this field, and we talked about just ways to have it kind of mature, kind of further, be more understood by the business stakeholders. I think it's been great to see data science continuing to have more of a seat at the table, just companies getting more oriented in their data-driven culture, at a point where AI services are not just a nice to have, but they're kind of expected, and just that appreciation that data is really the power within a company and a critical asset. And so I think that's kind of what my aspiration is for data science, just to continue to have a growing appreciation, impact, as much as we can, articulate the benefit of this role. I think it will mean that, increasingly I see the VP of data science or chief data analytics officer, being positioned very high in organizations, where I think it just sets up the team to be a core part of that strategy and having greater context on the impact and opportunities they can have. And so I think excited to continue in that direction.
Yeah, so from my side, I would say that data collection and decisioning becomes a primary design driver of business process and also technical systems. because without that, it's very difficult to really, it's more difficult to realize the impact of data science if you don't have that. Because a lot of, still in South Africa, and I'm not sure, so I know that the big internet companies, they actually follow that principle from the start. But in South Africa, and I think also with some of the fintechs, etc., it was normally an afterthought. So and also to Lisa's point is just expectation. So I think expectation management, and just to realize that there is no silver bullets.
If I could take a step further back from that even, and this, I think this is very specific to South Africa and other third world countries. It'll be amazing if the data in the government and healthcare systems, if that was actually made available to us. I mean, can you imagine what would happen then? And I think we'll definitely be achieving all our goals at that point. I'm not sure if that's a realistic expectation for the next 2 years. I very much doubt it, but at least we can all dream. But just to answer your point, when you asked the question first time, my immediate thought was like, if I could just put the models in place and go on a holiday, I mean, that would be great.
Well, it's Christmas holidays now, so you can test it out. But yeah, great. Yeah, I think we're at time. So thank you, everyone. That was just fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Leon, so much for joining us. And there were so many nuggets today. I wrote down a whole page of notes, which I'll write up more neatly later. And I'm sure people will be listening to this again afterwards. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And I hope you'll all have some holiday and a good holiday around now.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.